Clayton Kast, Director of Accounts here at Draft.dev. We're a technical content agency. We've been around for a few years now, specializing in any of that like written marketing, content, video content that you need tailored towards the developer community or other related technical audiences. Joined today by Meg Scarborough, who does something very similar over at Megawatt. She is also a content-focused agency, both on production strategy and placement front. A lot of experience in our topic today on the SEO front, and also joined by Nate Matterson, who used to be a former client of Draft, but during the Contain IQ days, so he had one of the more successful blogs and the technical audience market. Now he runs things over at Positional, CEO and co-founder over there on an application of basically a suite of applications at this point. They focused on SEO strategy when it pertains to your content and basically reworking your content into being more effective on that front. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. We're going to be focused and speaking to SEO strategies when it pertains to technical audiences. So we'll use the first 45 minutes today to dive through some talking points with each of these individuals. Then we'll use the last 15 minutes of today for a quick Q&A session. Take advantage of that functionality in the Zoom application. You'll see a button for Q&A. Just drop us any questions there that you want us to address later on. So I always like to start high level, team, and then work from there. We'll sort of get into the more nitty gritty as we progress through the conversation. And I think when it comes to SEO and how to adjust the strategy for technical audiences, there's almost like a relearning period you have to go through. If you've been a traditional marketer and you've worked with traditional consumer audiences, there's almost like you have to relearn how to tailor SEO when coming into and focusing more so on the technical audience. So I think that may be a good place to start. The two of you, I would love to hear your initial impressions of the major adjustments you have to make with SEO strategy when working with a technical audience that a lot of individuals joining today would be speaking to versus some of your more traditional marketing audiences out there. Let's start with Meg. You're the nodding head right now. You have some high points.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I actually, I've had the opposite experience. I've spent pretty much my entire career doing B2B content. And so I've never done a ton of consumer focused SEO. That would be the learning curve for me.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some things that are unique to dev tools companies and developer focused companies. I think a lot of it comes down to the precision of the language that you're using. So there's a learning curve in any industry. We work a lot with cybersecurity companies, a lot with developer focused companies. And those are two audiences where I always say it's like sharks. They can smell blood in the water. So if you're not using the right jargon, if you're not speaking the right language, they know right away that you don't know what you're talking about. And I think that impacts SEO a lot. I've worked with SEO firms who will send over kind of a list of keywords for, let's say, cybersecurity, and it's pretty clear they're actually talking about physical security, like how to keep people out of your house and things like that. So yeah, just precision of language really matters, and knowing how your audience talks about what they do. And getting that right when you're choosing keywords and optimizing your site.
Yeah. Clayton, it's good to be here. I actually started my career for the first 7 years of my career on the consumer side of things, specifically in consumer finance. So for the first 7 years of my career, I was writing about how to open up a bank account or, what is a credit score. And then I made my way into a more technical audience. A few years back, I built what became, I think, the largest Kubernetes blog, at least the largest independent Kubernetes blog out there over the course of a couple of years, despite not knowing anything about Kubernetes. I'm not an engineer. And so I kind of transitioned from consumer with what was a very simple product suite and market into something that was a lot more complex that I didn't understand, that I didn't have firsthand experiences with. And for me personally, I found that like creating content for a more technical audience was a lot more challenging. Like you need coding samples, you need to write 2,500 word tutorials. Like these pieces of content are very involved. I also found that creating content for a more technical audience was a lot more expensive. You know, 3-4 times as expensive as what it might be for creating a piece of content to serve what is like a non-technical consumer keyword. You know, as much as I like SEO tools and like I sell SEO tools these days, I found that doing keyword research for a technical audience was a lot harder because developers just generally aren't as well represented in like the sample populations in which keyword research tools try to predict search volume from. And, you know, I won't name any names, I won't name any tools, but like if you're using a popular SEO tool, I often found that like the search volumes that might get displayed in a keyword research tool were off by a magnitude of like 5 to 6x, at least in the Kubernetes space where I spent a couple of years. And so I think it's harder to do keyword research in the sense that like the data is just not as good. There's a lot more longer tail keywords that we'd need to serve. But at the same time, I think that's an opportunity if you're really willing to like put in the work beyond just a few simple keyword searches in a keyword research tool. And for example, listen to your customers, listen to your community. I think you can find a lot of other keywords that might not get picked up in a keyword research tool in non-traditional ways. So that was both a challenge, but also I think a big opportunity for us when we were building our Kubernetes site. And I think it's also a big opportunity for a lot of the other dev tool companies that I talk to and we work with. But yeah, I'll leave it at that for now.
You guys are hitting the points that I wanted to lead into anyways. I'm the one asking very leading questions here, but like totally agree. Whether it's like B2B or consumer, like the adjustments to our very technically oriented audiences that we're speaking to, there's no BS in your communication to them, right? Like you've got to have strong intent of what you're writing and have the technical depth to be able to communicate it. And well, like sort of what you were alluding to, Nate, like I know you guys probably see like occasionally and we'll receive SEO briefs from a client and like the brief that they received the agency from was putting 2 keywords together that in our space would be like making a peanut butter and mustard sandwich. I'm like, you understand that this just makes no sense together. It's just not pointing in the right direction.
You kind of have to be fluent to even like prioritize a keyword list.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. So on that vein, like how do you approach keyword research differently in our space, or what are the main points? Because there's definitely different strategies you can take here. Like the one I've always noticed is like, whereas in other spaces, you may want to avoid low keyword volume if people aren't talking about it yet. In a space where tech's constantly evolving, sometimes that's an opportunity to get the material out there for the rest of the market. So I would love to hear some of maybe the unique approaches you take to keyword research with our audience type.
Well, before you ever use a keyword research tool, like my standard advice is to just listen to the questions you just keep getting in like the customer sales process or customer support process. Because like odds are if you keep hearing the same question over and over and over again, like there's probably a keyword there, even if like a keyword research tool might not say there's a whole lot of search volume. And plus you can use that content in other ways. Like you can repurpose it for support, you can use it in the sales process, but then also make the bet that if you keep hearing this question from your prospects or your customers, odds are like other potential similar customers or prospects are going to be asking those similar questions. So that's where I would start. I think you certainly, to your point, Clayton, can get out in front of some of these keywords. And there is like an SEO advantage to doing that. Like I think if you are first on the scene to what might be like a popular keyword down the road, like your pages will tend to perform better, even as that keyword becomes more competitive and more popular. And, you know, companies will ask me like how much time or resources should I dedicate to keywords that might be unknowns? And my like standard advice is like 25% of the team's time or our resources, I think we could dedicate to some subset of keywords that are kind of an unknown that we can't validate with like a keyword research tool. Certainly not 100%. Like we don't want to be like dedicating 100% of our time writing for keywords that are unknowns. But I think 25%, 30% feels about right for me. And that's what we did with our Kubernetes blog.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think for folks who are not getting the opportunity to talk to customers as much as they would like to, there's a few other tactics you can use to kind of get into the minds of developers. I definitely recommend like spending time on developer communities like GitHub, Stack Overflow, Reddit. It's another good way to just kind of familiarize yourself with the technical jargon and language and how devs talk about things, but also just kind of see like what's top of mind for folks. What are there a lot of posts about? It's just kind of another way you can achieve the same thing that Nate's talking about.
It goes back to me like it's sort of a combo one, two punches. Like you sort of have like, it's an art and a science when you're doing it in this space. You have to just have the intimacy with the audience to understand it. Yeah. Because like, I mean, Google being the monster that it is tailored towards helping out, you know, the biggest member of its user base, which is going to be largely consumer and B2B. That's not technical audiences, right? So without that knowledge, it's going to be really difficult to not only research the topics you want to do, but like even after your research, you're starting to develop some content and you're starting to optimize that content towards reaching your audience. That's a whole nother like art in and of itself. How do you balance or strike the balance between, I guess, both in research and content creation, strike the balance between, you know, what the SEO tools are showing you and then optimizing that content towards what you know the audience actually needs? Does that make sense? Is that a clear question?
Yeah. It's a question clients ask us all the time. Like, do you start with the keywords or do you start with the audience needs? You always start with what the audience wants, what the audience is interested in.
Yep.
You figure out what are the keywords that make the most sense for us to incorporate here, right? But it's people behind the keywords, it's people behind the questions. So I say always start with what people are interested in, what people are looking for.
You know, I talk to a lot of developer tool companies and I kind of hate it when they say like it's SEO content. Like I really don't, I don't call it SEO content. I just call it like great content. Like there could be like there could be a keyword we want to target from an SEO point of view. And even if like that piece of content is not for SEO, there still might be a keyword that we'd want to target. You know, I think like I typically will do a lot of keyword research up front. Like whenever I'm building a site, like my goal is for my website to become like the definitive source of information on that topic. And so when I was building our Kubernetes blog, like I wanted our blog to get to the point where like if someone had a question about Kubernetes, they wouldn't have to go back to Google. Like they wouldn't have to go to another website. They could just get, you know, any question that they had about Kubernetes answered on our site. And so when I'm first like starting my keyword research process, like I mentioned, I would start first with like those questions you just keep hearing, you keep getting. I would then supplement it by doing like a little bit of competitor research, seeing like what are the keywords that your competitors are ranking for, even if they're not directly competitive with you. You know, and then from there, like you start to build that editorial calendar around like the different questions and keywords you want to hit. And when we were building our Kubernetes blog, we hit about 240 articles. And it was at that point where we were like, okay, we've like answered every question at this point. We can do something else. But, you know, I mapped out like, I would say the majority of those 240 pieces of content actually pretty much up front. And then I worked through that over the course of a couple of years.
That was probably like the fastest content production cycle I think I've ever seen, Dave. What you were able to do there in that short amount of time was very impressive. You guys are both like what I always actually, Dave, you may disagree with me here. What I usually say is like, let SEO be a tool to figure out what to write about. Don't let it tell you how to write it. Like we find a lot of people like get really, particularly if they don't have a lot of exposure to this market. I get this question all, or they want us to tailor our content towards specific like keyword density goals, like some of those more like just like reorganize the content based off how Google tells them they should, versus like organizing this highly technical content based off what we know will resonate best with the audience. It's like, okay, we need to write about this topic. Let's use it to figure out what to write about, but let's use our better judgment in writing to that technical audience when it comes to actually executing the content. Nate, with you and your tools, you may have a different take on that. I know you probably like fundamentally agree on the writing technically proficient content, but you may disagree on like how to organize it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of like content optimization tools out there that'll like give you suggestions on like keywords to use and like the word count to hit, things like that. But like you could have like a totally terrible piece of content and still get like an A in like a content optimization tool if you just go and you check a whole lot of boxes. And so I certainly don't think that like you just want to put out like cookie cutter content that has the right keywords in it. Like, you know, increasingly Google is like asking us to like do something unique. Like, you know, last year Google rolled out like an extension of its helpful content system. And if you read the documentation that Google provided as to like what is helpful content, they provide this really great checklist for like what is helpful content. And you know, like they kind of reiterate, like you want your content to have a perspective, you want to say something new, you want to add something to the internet. You know, they ask this question of like, would you expect to see this piece of content published in a newspaper? Things like that, right? So I certainly don't want to publish like cookie cutter content that just checks a lot of boxes. I want to publish content that has unique insights, awesome graphics, an awesome user experience, and checks a lot of boxes. So I want to do both, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, very fair. I guess maybe on a bigger picture, we've been talking about like writing content, like blog content, so we've been focusing on today. Are there any other, for a technical audience at SEO, like have maybe even just, let's zoom out a little bit, tailoring your website and your general online presence toward technical audiences? Is there some things that you need to take into higher consideration with this audience, like maybe like making sure there's strong focus on your quick start guides or documentation organization? Is there any opinions on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to think about SEO when you're producing your technical documentation, your quick start guides, all those sorts of things. And I think it comes down to making sure they're really well structured, they're easy to navigate, they're catering to the needs of your developers. So again, they're answering the common questions that you're getting, but also like really strong interlinking so that there's, you know, nice structure there and people can get from one related challenge to another, or one question to another. Google loves that as well as developers. So that's a nice way to hit both.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Internal linking is so important, especially if you have like multiple, I don't want to say disconnected because they could be connected with internal links, parts of your website. You know, I think a lot of developer tool companies do a great job in like ranking their documentation for certain keywords separate from like the keywords that they're targeting with their blog posts. And so I've seen and have used documentation alongside like traditional blog content pretty effectively. A lot of companies do it well. And I think internal linking between those two different sources of information is a great thing to do and helpful for someone that's coming to your site. But you know, SEO it isn't just content. Like, you know, there's also landing pages, there's product pages.
Exactly.
I would say the biggest mistake that I see companies make is they build the wrong type of page for the keyword that they're targeting. If you're ever confused as to like what type of page do we need to like serve the keyword we want to rank for, like the easiest thing to do is just like go to Google and like Google that keyword. And if you see that like the top 6 search results are blog posts, you know, that says we should create a blog post. If you see that like the top 6 search results are product pages, that tells us we want to create a product page. And that's, I think, actually a big step that people miss after they do their keyword research. So my first step would be keyword research. My second step would be figuring out what's the right type of page should we try to rank. Is it a blog post? Is it a docs page? Is it a product page? Is it something else? And then you actually go and create that web page.
Totally makes sense. Talk about some of these where we've talked about like link building, user intention. When building your strategy, like how do you prioritize some of these like different elements that you can focus on when actually tailoring the content? I know like user intention has been a huge talking point as of late, like particularly some of those like Google Docs that were linked earlier or leaked earlier this year. Would love to hear about like when you're working with your clients, how are you balancing all those different goals that you're trying to hit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just really important to make sure you understand the buyer's journey and also understand that I think this concept of the marketing funnel, right? A lot of people are starting to move away from it. And I think it's helpful to some extent as a rubric, but you do have to recognize that most people don't follow any kind of linear path when they're thinking about purchasing something. But you need to understand the basic kind of concepts of, is somebody problem aware? Are they solution aware? Are they ready to buy? And they're comparing things. And you need to make sure that you have a good mix of content across all of those kind of aspects of the buyer journey, even if people don't consume them necessarily in that order. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as prioritization goes, if like we're first starting to build an SEO strategy, like this is maybe somewhat controversial, but like I would not worry at all about technical SEO. I would not worry at all about building backlinks. Like in the first, like I'm talking like 2 to 3 months of building like an SEO strategy, like really the only thing I care about is keywords and more content. But like once we get like 2 to 3 months in, or maybe like you've already got a pretty large website to begin with, like then it can make some sense to like spend some time to think about technical SEO, spend some time to think about building backlinks, spend time thinking about user experience and trying to optimize your pages to provide a better user experience. So there are a lot of things you can do, but until your site's like got a foundation to it, there's a lot of things that we don't need to worry about. That's obviously different. Like I'm kind of speaking to like a startup that would be building an SEO strategy, but like if you're a later stage company or a publicly traded company, you've already got a very large web presence, then you might actually not need to focus on content and keywords in the very beginning. Maybe there are some structural technical SEO issues. Maybe there are some structural internal linking issues. And so one of the challenges of SEO is that it's very hard to like take an action and then determine if that action had a positive or negative impact. You kind of have to just do like a lot of things right. And you're not totally sure which one of those things that you did right ultimately led to the positive like movement or improvement. And that's like totally normal. And a lot of times developers don't like that because like they want to like do something and see an impact, when like SEO, it's very holistic. You have to do a lot
for investors. But unfortunately, I think that's marketing in general. After being in this space for long enough, but totally agree. One thing I always say on that SEO front with like newer brands is like I compare it to diets. Like everyone when they started diets, they're like, oh, I shouldn't eat these legumes, or I should only eat meat, or I need to be a vegetarian. I'm like, is your calorie count even in check? Like with SEO, are you even consistently producing content over an extended period of time that's relevant to your audience? Let's start there. That's going to be 80% of your battle. What are your recommendations for people that already have well-established brands? We know how important sort of like the whole identification of like being an established brand is with Google and SEO these days. If you're already one of those established brands, how do you like to evolve the strategy from that point? What are you considering then?
An established brand from an SEO point of view, or an
SEO standpoint? Like you're already ranking high, you're already when people are Googling that subject, you're already at the top of the list. How do you continue to sort of evolve from there? Is it just a matter of maintenance, or is it staying ahead of the curve?
Well, that's when like it then becomes like a conversion rate optimization game. Like I started my career in lead generation, and like there were 2 ways to make twice as much money. Like you either had to double the amount of traffic or you had to double the conversion rate. And so if you've already got like an established content SEO strategy or driving traffic, like that's when I would probably shift a lot of my time and focus to trying to extract more from that traffic I'm already getting. Just like anecdotally, I think a big mistake that a lot of developer tool companies make is they use like the exact same call to actions across every single page on their site, across every different stage of the funnel. And I always try to coach folks to like really personalize that CTA to the stage of the funnel, to that page that someone is on. And you can do a lot of testing there. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think also, I mean, I guess once you get to a certain level, you do have the advantage of stepping back and trying to capture more of that long tail traffic. And to the point about conversion rate optimization, we had a client that realized that they just didn't have, excuse me, one of my kids is trying to get in here, didn't have enough middle of funnel content that was aligned to their value propositions. And when we helped them create more of that type of content, it significantly improved their engagement metrics and their demos booked, right? So that was an appropriate keyword for us to be using at that stage of the funnel based on the types of searches that we were creating content for. So yeah, I think the long tail opportunities and the conversion rate optimization are the big things I'd be thinking about as a more mature brand from an SEO perspective.
Yeah. And maybe just one thing to add, like, is say, for example, like your company is ranking like in the 4th spot for a given keyword. That's an exciting place to be, because like some small tweaks can like mean going from the 4th spot to the 2nd spot. And if we can do that, we're going to get twice as much traffic. And so, I think developer tool companies, I made to make a broad statement, like write really poor title tags. Like they're just not very exciting. Like you don't get the juiciness in like the title tags that you would get from like a consumer company. And so, for like a lot of developer tool companies, I think if you've got like a few hundred pages already, let's just spend like a few hours and look at our title tags for some of those pages that are already ranking well. And I bet you can get some quick wins that way.
The other one, like we'll see a lot, is the client will have one article where they're ranked number 2, but the competitors rank number 1. And then they'll have a slew of articles where they're in like the ranking in the 15 to 20 range, like they're almost on the 2nd page. It's like they want to put all the effort into getting that number 2 article above the competitor at number 1. It's like we could get all those slew of articles that are ranking 10, 15, 20 up into getting ranked in the top 10. And you see much more effective turnaround. I feel like putting forth the effort there is just a little bit of lower hanging fruit.
Yeah. Maybe one other thing to add is like, I look at each piece of content on my website as if it was like just published today. I was talking to a developer tool company the other day in like the network observability space, and they had like an article from 2011 that was at like the bottom of the 1st page for like a pretty decent keyword. And I'm like, dang guys, like let's just
update this.
Let's get this updated to 2024. This article was published 13 years ago.
I feel like the updating battle's brutal, but like you can pick and choose. Yeah.
I do feel like I'm hearing more and more companies understand the value of refreshing pages for SEO. We're doing a lot more refresh work than we used to be. People are starting to understand that they need to balance net new with refreshes.
Yeah, I feel like the struggle there is always the bandwidth. It's like if you're a small marketing team on a dev tool company, it's like, goodness Christ, we have how much? Like we're barely keeping our docs up to date. So I guess maybe, how do you prioritize that? Nate's sort of already implied there. It's like if you have an old article that's still ranking 11, let's just take that hour to get that up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, and especially if like you're in an industry where the information is like constantly changing. Like we need to stay on top of it, because like we don't want someone to come to our website and like we give them misinformation. Like that just would be a positive thing for our brand.
Yeah, agreed. So something that I'd be curious to hear you, in the dev tool space, technical audience space, a lot of times we'll have 2 approaches. You're making your money off of having like a big user base, right? Like an open source tool or something like that, or you're more focused on enterprise. You've got a few big clients, and you're trying to chase those big fish every day. Is there, I'm sure, a difference in SEO strategy for you when looking at those 2 different sort of styles of audiences that we often run into in the dev tool space?
Yeah, I can definitely speak more to, most of our clients are enterprise technology versus SaaS, not not exclusively, but most of them. So one of the interesting challenges when it comes to, a developer tool or something in that space where developers or technical folks are going to have a big impact on the ultimate decision about whether to buy it or not and whether it actually gets used. But they're not the final decision maker. And often the final decision maker is not as technical or not as like in the day-to-day weeds where they're Googling, how do I solve this technical problem? They're a lot more concerned about things like ROI and how is this going to fit into our larger tech stack? And is there risk involved and things like that? And so we're often, we often see our enterprise clients writing too much how-to content and too much highly technical content and not balancing out because they see a lot of traffic to it, but that traffic doesn't ultimately convert because those aren't their buyers. You need to, make those people happy and there's a balance to be struck, but ultimately you need to be speaking to the decision makers as well. So we're often counseling them about ensuring that you have a nice kind of balance between those audiences. And obviously I'm oversimplifying by saying it's just two audiences. There's a lot of people involved in an enterprise sale that takes 12 to 18 months. But you need to have content for all of them, really.
Totally. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like you want to think about the different personas like you want to reach. Maybe it is a developer, maybe it's a product manager, maybe it's someone from leadership. And we want to think about like the different content we need for each of those potential touch points. I think like if you're like a PLG company, like you've got a free trial sign up, like, targeting keywords that, when I was in like the Kubernetes space, we did a lot of tutorials around like specific issues people were having right now. And then we like presented our product as like a way to solve for that issue right now. And that was like, that worked because like the developer had this issue right now. Like they could actually use a tool right now that they could self-serve onto. But for like, more enterprise heavy companies, I think like there is value in just being there. Like if someone is like searching or a potential buyer is like searching keywords relevant to your business and they don't see your company anywhere in the search results, even if like you're not going to convert that customer today, I still think there's value in just existing in search when you're an enterprise company. But if you are going more enterprise, like you certainly want to be like repurposing this content into many other different shapes and formats, like for example on LinkedIn or in a newsletter or on YouTube. So maybe it's definitely more nuanced for like an enterprise sales cycle, but still think it's very valuable.
Totally. Yeah, you have to be in the consideration set.
We'll dive into this a little bit more. We just got a Q&A drop that wants a little bit more info on this. So we'll hit that in a little bit more detail later. But getting towards like the measurables when it comes to our world, like if you're a marketing team, you only hold on to the budget that you can prove is doing something, right? So how in your SEO efforts, what do you find are going to be the most effective ways of measuring ROI? There's the obvious ones, but we'd love to hear about how you guys typically like to manage that with your clients and what you recommend for them.
Yeah, I mean, typically we're looking at organic traffic, keyword rankings, conversion rates, bounce rates and dwell times, backlink profiles. Those are the big ones that we are generally guiding our clients to pay attention to, but I bet Nate has a much more nuanced perspective on that.
No, I think you're right. I think it depends on like what stage of building an SEO channel you're in. Like if you're on day one and like you've got like 2 blog posts on your site today and a couple items and docs, like, those leading indicators I would be paying attention to would be, things like the number of keywords you're ranking for, search impressions, often like a leading indicator to search traffic. But if you're a very mature business and you've already got like a pretty large SEO channel, like I think, metrics like organic search traffic, and conversions are great. I also was talking to this guy named Sean from Ramp, the corporate credit card company, on my podcast a few months back. And He and his team, he mentioned, actually set like even more granular goals on like the performance of some content. So they look at things like average time on page and bounce rate and scroll depth, and to get a sense of like, not only are people coming to our web pages, but are they consuming them? So if you want to get like more granular, you certainly can.
I feel like I see the struggle with like particularly like the mid-sized clients of we've got to prove to leadership that these efforts are worthwhile. But if we just write, they'll find themselves in situations like we could write content that's going to drive a ton of impressions that aren't necessarily qualified or good at what we're looking for, or we can write the content that is like doesn't necessarily drive like the high visitor traffic, but keeps our user base very informed and educated. And it's the kind of stuff their own internal engineers would write. And they seem to be struggling with the juxtaposition between those two and like proving the numbers to leadership versus writing the content that they know would be most educational towards their audience. And sometimes those don't always align. Have you witnessed something like that?
Well,
Does that make sense?
If you've got an existing customer base and we're trying to argue like, is this content worthwhile to create for like our existing customer base, you can certainly like tie the consumption of that content to like renewals or like expansion or something like that. But I mean, the marketing attribution tools have like gotten pretty good. And so like I've seen a lot of like companies, even if that person doesn't convert from content today, like was content used in the sales process? Like, did they at all at some point consume a piece of content before they talk to a sales rep? So I think there are a lot of ways you can attribute content to a sales process or renewal, even if it's not like a PLG motion where we can directly connect like a blog post to a conversion that happened on the same day.
Totally agree. The data is probably there. It just may not be getting measured. A unique one I've actually seen from a client in the past is they number of customer service cases that were closed by sending that document versus having to actually get on a call. They were measuring some of the success via that way too. So
that's why I write blog posts, like predominantly, like, I'd send them to our customers like on a daily basis to answer the questions that I just keep getting over and over and over again. So yeah,
exactly. So there's been a lot, particularly I feel like this summer, a lot of interesting stuff coming out about future of SEO. How is it changing? Some of the leaks coming out from Google, maybe like what Google had previously been saying to us versus like what looks like is actually being measured. Meg and Nate, would love to hear from you on how you feel SEO has been changing recently over the last few months, what some of the emergent trends are. Where do you see it going from here on out? Sort of focus on that in these last few minutes here.
I think the most obvious change, and the change that impacts your SEO strategy and your content strategy in general the most, is SGE. So if AI can answer the question easily and folks don't even have to leave the search page, they're probably not going to, unless they're really trying to go deep on something. But if it's a 101 type of question, I think AI is going to take over that search traffic pretty quickly. So you can either think about, how do you optimize your content so it gets pulled into those AI snippets, but I still think your click-through rates are not going to be that great as we go forward. So to me, that's more of a reason to focus on differentiated content and content that's, going deeper than the 101 level, answering more complex questions. And again, really focusing on like, where do you have expertise and authority that other folks don't? What articles can you write that no one else can write, that your competitors can't write? So going back to Nate's points earlier about the new EAT algorithms. But yeah, I think SGE is the biggest thing. I know we're starting to see some more voice search usage. So starting to figure out how to optimize your content for voice search it is an interesting problem that I think is starting to crop up. And then, yeah, I mean, some of the changes are really just hammering home things that most sites should have figured out by now, like site speed. You got to know that developers care about site speed. They don't want pages that load slowly. If your page loads slowly, they stop trusting you immediately. They go somewhere else. And they're also more likely to do mobile searches. So mobile friendliness is really important as well.
The sites fee won't even kill me when I've got a call with a prospect and they've reached out to us. I'm trying to research them to figure out what they do, and I just can't even get the site to load. I'm like, you guys have over-engineered this thing. God's screw that. Yeah, it's totally agree. Nate, what's your take, man?
I'll try to go quickly. SGE, AI overviews, as they're called in the SERP now. They're certainly new. They started rolling out in a bigger way in May. But we've seen some anecdotal research that would suggest that Google is pulling back slightly on the prevalence of AI overviews in the SERPs, which is interesting. Who knows if that trend continues? I think that we've also seen some anecdotal evidence that AI overviews will often have a 10% negative impact on click-through rate and traffic to publishers. And so I agree with Meg's point. We're probably not going to drive a lot of traffic from a keyword like what is Kubernetes when it's currently being served by an AI overview as we speak. Although I think developer sites are less at risk, especially if you're doing a lot of that middle of the funnel content that Meg was talking about. If we're doing an in-depth tutorial on some specific Kubernetes issue, that's just not going to get served with an AI overview. And so I think there's maybe less to worry about in that regard for companies with highly technical content versus a company that's writing a what is a bank account article. I think the wallets of the world might have a little bit more to worry about. But as far as helpful content goes, I think the bar for the quality and uniqueness of your content is the highest it's ever been. My opinion is that we want to balance experience alongside expertise more than we ever have right now. In Google Search Rater guidelines, they talk about that balance between experience and expertise, but I think Google has pressed the button a little bit harder on experience and showcasing that experience in your content. And so that's what we're leaning into with our content strategy right now. But I think that's universal across, any industry. I think that's be something good to do, and it probably have a positive impact on conversions too once someone gets to your site.
Totally. That's one of those things, if you're writing towards this technical audience correctly anyways, it's good to see Google aligning with that. But the story's always been you can't BS this audience, man. Write educational content that's correct and relevant to your developers, and it's going to work out in the long run. Awesome. How about some Q&A? The first one we got sort of towards the beginning here, to the point of making a site a definitive website for that topic. So I include topics, for example, what is a Kubernetes? So that I guess goes back to what you were saying, balancing between the true SEO of some of those very general topics that so you show up in search terms versus this sort of mid funnel, a little bit more in depth kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when I die, they're gonna put topical authority on my gravestone. I would still create the what is articles, and I know totally. People are gonna be oh, you're wasting resources, you're not gonna convert any customers from them, and I agree with you. But I still create that extremely evergreen content within my topic space. From a topical authority standpoint. So I would still create it. I know a lot of people disagree with me on that, and that it's a waste of resources, but personally, I would still do the very evergreen stuff if I had the resources to do it.
It's a funnel, man. I think it all supports each other. I agree with you.
The other important thing about the evergreen, the super evergreeny stuff, even if we're not going to convert customers from it, pages like that often accumulate a lot of backlinks. And so then we can use internal links pretty strategically to pass PageRank or whatever you want to call it onto the pages on our site that might be more competitive or we can actually convert customers from. So it can be a good backlink supplement too, in my opinion.
I was just talking to a customer who's pretty prevalent in the security space, and they've sort of been a number two trying to catch up to the number one, and that evergreen stuff has been working wonders for them. They've got the metrics to tie to it. So it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I wouldn't ignore it.
I think it's harder the newer you are to the space, especially as a comes in. But yeah, again, if you've been around for a while, I think you're totally right.
Another
I just wrote an article titled "What is a blog post?" So when it comes out, like you can make.
I'll share that. Yeah, we'll link to it on Draft. The other unique thing there too, and this is sort of off topic, but we're starting to see some of the dev tools companies use like AI tools to allow for quicker search through their documents and content. So like if you have some of that evergreen stuff and people, you forget little things all the time. And if they're just able to search your site for it, whether it's through one of those more sophisticated AI tools searching through your site or just like searching through your docs versus having to go outside and Google it again, always a good thing.
Use them on your site.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So this is more to what we were just talking about. Core persona is the dev community, but sales is looking for enterprise deals championed by non-technical stakeholders. How do you balance content efforts both with the lean marketing team? I think that end piece is key there, but you have to speak to both audiences. I've always been a sales guy, a marketing guy, and early in my sales career, like the old heads would say, don't waste your time talking to what they called the Dilberts from the old comic book strip, which is like the end users. Yeah. I always found that really offensive because the technical decision makers, the people signing the contracts, they are living and breathing in that daily task every day. So no matter what, that person is going to be involved in that sell process to some extent. They're going to be, after you do the sales pitch or that sales guy does the sales pitch, they're going to be going and talking to those team members internally. So my take is you have to speak to both. The harder part, and you two know more about this, is balancing the efforts between the two.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it comes down to exactly what type of product you're selling and what the sales cycle looks like. So I think I would start with a baseline of let's do 50-50 here. Let's target the, the C-suite or whoever the ultimate non-technical decision buyer is, decision maker, and 50% towards the technical champions. But then I would change that sliding scale based on, again, how much influence do they have in the buying cycle, and do they have the power to veto, and what kinds of things would lead them to veto. So, talking to your sales team and really getting as deep into the buyer journey as you can and understanding how much influence each side has, that's how I would kind of move the slider. But you definitely have to balance them. And if you don't know where to start, go 50-50.
Yeah, if I would take a look at what your homepage looks like today. If your H1 is the best email service for developers, that already tells you today who focus is. But if your H1 is something like McKinsey, doing good for the world, something like that, then maybe that tells you who you're trying to reach. So I would look at your...
That's assuming you've got your homepage messaging right in the first place.
Yeah, but I agree with Meg. It's definitely a balancing act, and 50-50 seems right to me.
Yeah, agreed. Don't let your sales team ignore those end users is what I would say to that. Keep everyone involved. Yeah, call them Dilberts. Yeah, that exists. Particularly big world. All right, so we're out of Q&A. Great talk today, guys. I know SEO is particularly one of the hotter topics this year. So everyone that's on the call today, we'll be sharing this recording later within the next few weeks. We'll send it down on all the social platforms. Meg, Nate, sincerely appreciate both you guys joining today. Anyone on the call, check out both their organizations. They are fantastic for our space. Definitely worth hitting them up if you need assistance in what both of them specialize in. Otherwise, we'll call it a couple minutes early here. Really appreciate everyone's time today.
Thanks so much, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, have a good one.
Thanks for having me here, Clayton. Have a great rest of your week.